The wind howled like a pack of hungry wolves, rushing across the frozen prairie with such fury that even the trees bent to its cry. Snowflakes sliced through the dark like little daggers, sticking to the cracked glass of lanterns and frosting the wild grasses that clung desperately to the ground. It was midnight, moonless, merciless, and silent but for the storm's roar. A figure appeared at the edge of the gravel path leading up to Blackamoor Manor, a girl, no older than 10, bundled in a too-thin coat, its hem torn and frayed. She walked steadily despite the blizzard, her boots soaked through and her tiny fingers red with cold. In her arms, wrapped in a patchwork quilt and barely moving, was a bundled baby no more than a year old. She stumbled once, her knee sinking into a snowbank, but she caught herself before she fell. Her lip trembled not from fear, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Something like determination carved out of hardship. The mansion stood before her like a fortress, carved from stone and sadness. Its towering silhouette loomed against the sky, shutters shut, windows dark. It had been called many things over the years: Blackamoor's curse, the widow's hold, and most often, simply the Baron's tomb. The man who lived inside hadn't been seen in weeks, maybe months. Rumor was he spoke to no one, trusted no one, and welcomed no one. Not even the preacher dared visit anymore, but the girl climbed the final steps of the porch. Her breath came in shaky clouds. She paused, looked at the massive wooden door with its brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, then lifted her small hand and knocked, once, twice, 3 times. Silence followed. Then, the slow creak of footsteps on wood, heavy, reluctant, drawn out like a man waking from a decades-long sleep. Behind the door, a lock slid. A second, a third. The hinges groaned as the door opened just a crack. Light flickered inside, warm, golden, hesitant. A tall figure emerged in the gap. Hair gray as ash. Eyes as cold and sharp as steel. A long coat wrapped tightly around broad shoulders. He said nothing for a moment, just stared. The girl stared back, chin up, fearless. "Who are you?" The man said finally, voice like gravel ground beneath boot heels. She swallowed, steadied herself, and said with clarity beyond her age, "He left us, sir. Mama said you might help." The man's brow furrowed. "Who left you?" She didn't blink. "My mama's man. He ran off with the trader 3 nights ago. Left us with nothing but her fever and this little one." The baby whimpered, and she shifted him in her arms. "She got real sick. Told me to find you. Said the Baron would know what to do. Sighed, said you owed her something." The wind surged around them, tugging at her coat. The man stared, his face frozen, not with cold, but memory. "What's your name, girl?" "Clara," she replied. The name seemed to strike something deep in him. His eyes darkened, not with suspicion, but sorrow. "And the boy?" "Jamie. He's mine to care for now." She squared her shoulders. "I can work for you if you want. Mama said you ain't cruel. She said she used to know you once, before you had all this." Her eyes flicked to the manor. A long silence followed. The storm howled louder, as if angry that she hadn't been turned away. But the man, Baron Gideon Blackamoor, opened the door wider. "Come inside," he said. Clara hesitated. "I don't bite," he added with the ghost of a grim smile. "I don't scare easy," she said. He chuckled softly, a strange, broken sound like an old wheel finally turning. Inside, the mansion was dim and cold, like it hadn't known laughter or warmth in a long time. Shadows lingered in corners. Dust lay thick on old portraits. But the fire in the main hall crackled, casting a comforting glow. He took her coat and hung it, wordless. She noticed the way his hand trembled just slightly. "You're soaked through," he said. "Come sit by the fire. Lay the boy down." She approached the hearth and gently lowered Jamie onto a worn bearskin rug. The baby stirred, coughed, and whimpered again. Gideon knelt beside her, examined the infant. "He's feverish." "Like Mama was," Clara whispered. He nodded. "I'll send for the doctor." He rang a bell, a long-forgotten pull string hanging in the hallway. Moments later, a weary-looking housekeeper appeared. She blinked in shock at the sight of Clara and Jamie, but said nothing. "Hot water. Blankets. Call for Dr. Lapham," Gideon ordered. The woman disappeared, urgency in her steps. Gideon turned back to Clara. "How old are you?" 10. "But I cook and clean like I'm 20, she replied proudly. "And you've been caring for him alone?" She nodded. "Mama got real bad. She made me promise I'd take Jamie here. Said you'd help. Said you might still care." He sat heavily in the old armchair, staring into the fire. His voice was low, almost to himself. "Evelyn," Clara turned. "That was her name. Did you know her?" He didn't answer directly. Just said, "She once gave me a reason to breathe." She didn't understand, but she felt the weight in his words. "Will you help us?" she asked. He looked at her, truly looked. Saw Evelyn in her eyes, her stubborn chin, her quiet strength. "I should have helped a long time ago." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He rose, stepped forward, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I mean, you're home." The words fell like snowflakes, soft, cold, but changing everything. Clara looked at him, uncertain, then finally said, "I don't know what home feels like. But if it means Jamie gets better and we get warm meals, then thank you." Gideon chuckled again, slightly fuller this time. "Let's start there." He led her into the next room, the firelight trailing behind like hope finally waking from its long slumber. The house had changed overnight. The old portraits on the walls didn't feel quite so haunted. The ticking grandfather clock, which once felt like the only living thing in the manor, now shared its rhythm with the tiny breaths of baby Jamie resting. Upstairs, the wind still howled outside the stone walls, but within them, the storm had quieted. Clara sat in the kitchen that morning, perched on a wooden stool much too tall for her legs. A bowl of hot oats steamed in front of her. She watched the spoon like it was a foreign object, half expecting the food to vanish if she blinked. Baron Gideon Blackamore stood by the stove. He wasn't a man who knew his way around pans and kettles. But he was trying hard. The cook had left months ago. Most of the staff had, really. What remained was silence, ghosts, and regret. Now there was Clara. And Jamie. And something else. Memory. Years earlier, 15. To be exact, Gideon wasn't always a baron, nor always so alone. He once rode bareback across the same fields Clara had walked the night before. He was strong then, not in the weight he could carry kind of way, but in the laugh out loud, kiss a girl in the rain kind of way. And there had been a girl. Evelyn Wyatt, fiery, sharp as a knife, rode horses like a Comanche and could beat any man in town at poker. She'd come into his life like wildfire dancing, into the local dance hall with dirt on her boots and flowers in her braid. They were young, reckless, and stupid in the way only lovers can afford to be. Gideon would meet her at the river's edge every Friday night, and she'd kiss him like the world was ending at midnight. He'd tell her about his dreams of leaving his father's expectations behind. No title, no estate, just a ranch, a few cattle, and Evelyn beside him. She'd smile but say, "You're a Blackamore, Gideon. You can't run from blood." And maybe she was right, because when Gideon's father passed suddenly, the title of baron fell on him like an iron yoke. The land, the debts, the politics, all of it chained him to a legacy he never wanted. And his mother? She'd never forgive him for shaming the bloodline with a poor farm girl like Sauce. Evelyn. So he made a deal. Marry the governor's niece, gain land, status, secure the title. Leave Evelyn behind. He never told her why. Never said goodbye. Just stopped showing up by the river. When he returned years later, She was gone. Present day, the memory struck him as he watched Clara eat. Same wild braid. Same furrowed brow when the porridge was too hot. Same defiant silence. It was like Evelyn was sitting across from him again, but smaller, fragile, unaware of the storm she had stepped into. Did your mama ever talk about me? Gideon asked cautiously. Clara paused her spoon. Sometimes. Good things? Some, Gideon chuckled, though it lacked humor. Only some? She said you were a stubborn, proud, horse-riding fool with a smile that lied easy. Gideon choked on his coffee. Clara didn't look up. She said she loved you once. His hand froze mid-air. She also said you broke her heart worse than any bullet could have. The room went quiet, but not heavy. Just honest. She forgave you, Clara added after a moment. But she never stopped wondering why you never came back. He looked out the window. The snow was still falling. I was afraid, he admitted. Of her? Clara asked. Of being someone who didn't deserve her. Then you were a coward, Clara said, bluntly. Gideon smiled faintly. You're definitely her daughter. Clara lifted her eyes to meet his. But Mama also said you weren't evil, that if I ever needed help, you were the only person who wouldn't slam the door. He nodded slowly. She was right, he whispered. Later that day, Gideon walked alone through the west wing of the house. He hadn't been down that hallway in years. Portraits of noble ancestors lined the walls, men in powdered wigs, women in lace, all looking down with eyes that passed judgment even through paint. At the very end of the hall was a locked room. His but the fingers fumbled with a ring of keys, rusty, unfamiliar until one finally turned. The door creaked open into a space untouched by time. A simple room, small writing desk, rocking chair, and a picture on the mantel. Evelyn. Young, laughing, holding a flower in one hand, waving with the other. He had painted it from memory after she left, then locked it away as if trying to freeze the guilt. Now, with Clara here, it all came flooding back. He knelt before the fireplace, staring at the painting. I failed you, he murmured, but I won't fail them. Downstairs, Clara explored the library. She ran her fingers along the spines of old books, leather cracked and titles faded. She paused at one Tales of the Wild Frontier, opened it, and saw Gideon's name written inside in young, eager handwriting. So he had once been a dreamer like her. She found a journal tucked in a drawer, her mother's name scrawled in the corner in Gideon's old handwriting. She closed the drawer. Maybe she wasn't ready for that yet. That evening, they sat by the fire again. Jamie lay on a pile of quilts, finally asleep. His fever had dropped slightly, thanks to the doctor's visit. Clara watched him with a sister's weary affection. Is he really my brother? Gideon asked quietly. Not by blood, Clara said. But Mama took him in after his real folks died in a fire. She said blood doesn't decide family. Gideon smiled gently. She was right again. She usually was, Clara replied. Gideon leaned back in his chair, staring at the crackling logs. Clara, he said slowly, if I told you I wanted you to stay here, not just for the night or the winter, but longer, would that scare you? She didn't answer immediately. I don't scare easy, she reminded him, but I've never stayed anywhere long enough to believe it was mine. Gideon's voice was soft. This could be yours. She looked at him, really. Looked at him. Past the beard, the tired eyes, the stiff posture. She saw the man her mother once loved, and maybe the man who could still be something more. We'll see, she said. And for Gideon Blackamore, that was more than enough. The snow didn't stop falling for days. It blanketed the vast estate of Blackamore Manor like nature was trying to hush the past, covering every trace of sorrow, mistake, and memory. But inside the manor, for the first time in over a decade, life. had returned in the form of tiny baby coughs, soft laughter, the clatter of spoons against bowls, and the uncertain sounds of a reclusive baron learning how to exist with others again. Gideon. Blackamoor had always believed silence was safety, but Clara. Clara was noise, soft singing while folding laundry, planking pots while learning to stir porridge, whispering stories to Jamie at night even when she didn't know if he understood them. Her voice, untrained and young, carried through the long, stone halls, echoing off dusty woodwork and stubborn shadows. Gideon listened from behind doors at first, then from stairwells, then from the chair by the fire pretending to read a book while Clara narrated stories to the baby with the imagination of a novelist and the wit of a street performer. She called him Sir for a week, then quietly started calling him Mr. Blackamoor. It wasn't Papa, it wasn't Dad, but it was a shift, and for Gideon, it was everything. Mornings became rituals. Clara insisted on helping cook, even though her eggs were runny, and she always burned the first pancake. Gideon stood behind her in the kitchen, arms crossed. You flipped it too soon. No, I didn't. You definitely did. The bubbles hadn't popped yet. Clara gave him a look that could peel wallpaper. Next time you flip it, Sir Expert Chef of Nothing. He raised his brows and cracked a rare grin. Fair. Jamie gurgled from the cradle beside the stove. The boy had gained color in his cheeks. His eyes, once sunken with fever, now blinked curiously at the world. He laughed often, especially when Clara made silly faces or bounced him gently while whispering old lullabies. Gideon had built many things in his life barns, fences, reputations, but he had never built trust, until now. Clara had rules. Don't lie to her. Don't talk about Mama like she was a ghost. Don't make promises you can't keep. Gideon respected those rules. Even when they stung. One afternoon, while brushing down the mare in the stable, Clara asked him abruptly, "Did you ever try to find her?" He paused, comb in hand. The wind whistled through the open stall. "No," he answered honestly, "but I thought of her every day." "Thinking doesn't feed babies," she replied. "No," he admitted, "but maybe it can raise them now." She looked at him, hard, then gave a single nod and returned to brushing the mare's flank. It was her way of saying, "All right, for now." The townsfolk noticed. Blackamoor Manor, once a tomb, now had a warm glow in the windows at night. Smoke curled from its chimney. The horses were ridden again. The doctor, after visiting Jamie, spoke kindly of the little girl with the bark of a general and the heart of a shepherd. But gossip brewed quickly. "She's his bastard, you know. Child of that Wyatt woman. She was nothing but trouble. Probably after his fortune. He's lost his mind, letting strays in like that." Clara heard whispers when she went into town with Gideon to fetch fabric and feed. She kept her head high, but he noticed her hands clench. Afterward, she didn't say a word the whole wagon ride home. That night, he sat her down beside the fire. "You know, my titles brought me many things," he said. "Land, votes, letters. From people I don't care about, but all of it felt empty." He leaned in, until a stubborn little girl knocked on my door in a storm. Clara looked at him. "People talk. Let them," he said. "They don't decide who you are." Her voice was quiet. "Mama said I'd have to be stronger than the world." She was right. Then, for the first time, Clara moved closer and rested her head against his side. Awkward, hesitant. But Gideon didn't breathe for a moment, afraid to scare the moment away. He placed a hand on her shoulder and held her. Manor didn't feel so cold that night. Spring crept in slowly. With it came green grass, the smell of thawing earth, and birdsong. Clara insisted on helping plant the vegetable garden. Gideon laughed when she dug more holes in her dress than in the soil. She painted a wooden sign that read, Wyatt Garden. She didn't ask permission. Gideon didn't make her. One day, a package arrived. Inside was a leather-bound book. On the cover, for Clara Blackamore. Inside, in Gideon's handwriting, every home needs stories. Here's the first. We'll write the rest together. Clara didn't cry, but she hugged him tightly that night, whispering, "Thank you." The first storm of spring came with thunder. Jamie screamed from his crib. Clara sat up immediately, pressing her hands over his ears, whispering, "It's okay. It's just clouds yelling." She looked up as Gideon entered, holding a lantern. "I used to hide under the bed when it thundered," he admitted. "You're too big for that," Clara replied. "Then I learned to count between the lightning and the boom. Told myself it was just God moving furniture." Clara gave him a look. "That's dumb." It helped. They counted together. By the sixth boom, Jamie was asleep again. So was Gideon. In the chair beside their bed, leaning back, arms crossed, Clara watched him. She didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt something closer to safe. One evening, while trimming a rosebush, Clara asked, "Why don't you ever laugh?" Gideon paused. "I forgot how, then learn. I'm trying." She plucked a petal and flicked it at his face. "Try harder." So he did. The next week, he built her a swing on the old oak in the courtyard. It creaked, the ropes a little uneven, but when Clara swung high, her laughter filled the entire sky. He laughed too, and then one morning, over tea, she said it, not loud, not formally, not even with eye contact, just casually, while pouring milk into Jamie's cup. "Papa, pass the bread." Gideon froze. So did time. She noticed his pause, eyes flicking up in alarm. "I mean, I didn't mean to," but he reached over, handed her the bread, and whispered, "I've never been called that before." Not once. She looked at him. "Do you like it?" He smiled, real and warm. "I love it." And from that moment on, the manor was no longer the Baron's tomb. It was Clara's home, Jamie's nursery, Gideon's redemption. The cold that had haunted its halls for 15 years was replaced by warmth, not just from the hearth, but from tiny footprints across dusty floors, unfiltered giggles echoing in halls, and the heavy healing silence of peace. The sun was warmer now. The frost had melted from the stone steps of Blackamore Manor, and tiny wildflowers bloomed shyly along the edge of the gravel road. Birds had returned to the trees. Clara had taken to waking early, swinging under the oak tree barefoot, her eyes closed, feeling like she belonged to the earth again. Jamie had begun crawling fast and dangerously curious. One morning he somehow escaped from the parlor and was found in the pantry, sitting happily in a basket of potatoes, gumming a raw carrot with drool and delight. The house was alive. The rooms were no longer still. The silence had surrendered to the sound of family. But even the warmest fire can't keep out a storm when someone opens a door, and someone somewhere was about to knock. Not like Clara had, with need in her voice and a baby in her arms, but with greed and a cruel, jagged smile. It began with a name. Clara had gone into town that day with Gideon. They were picking up new books and seeds. The townspeople had grown used to them now. The stares had faded into nods. The whispers had dulled into quiet greetings. Even the grumpiest folk gave Clara a wave, or Jamie a tickle on the chin. But as they stepped out of the general store, a voice sliced through the calm like a whip through silk. "Well, if it ain't little Clara Wyatt." She froze. The name didn't just carry memory, it carried threat. She turned. And there he stood, Elias Boone, tall, grizzled, crook-teethed, and mean. Once Evelyn's lover, then tormentor, then deserter. And now, suddenly back. He grinned, though it was more a baring of teeth than anything friendly. "You've grown, girl. Thought you'd be halfway to the grave after that last winter." Clara's hand instinctively reached for Gideon's coat. Gideon stepped forward, placing himself between Elias and the children. "You know her?" he asked, voice like stone. Elias tilted his hat. "Know her? I raised her for a year or two. After her mama got herself knocked up. I did what I could. You abandoned us," Clara said. "You left her sick and left me with nothing." Elias grinned wider. "That's a harsh take. We all have to survive, don't we?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Leave," he said. Elias raised a brow. "I'm just saying hello. Civil, right? She doesn't want you near her. That's not civil. That's a warning." For a moment, Elias seemed to weigh his odds. Then, with a smirk, he tipped his hat again. "See you around, Baron." That night, the fear came back. Clara didn't eat. She didn't read. She didn't sing to Jamie. She just sat by the window, knees tucked to her chest. Gideon didn't push her, but when she finally spoke, it was with a voice scraped thin by memory. "He used to drink. Real bad. Yell. Mama tried to leave, and he broke her arm once." Gideon stared at the fire, his fists clenched. "She hit us once in the woodshed for 2 days. Said he was looking for her with a knife." Jamie stirred upstairs. She didn't move. "He's not just a bad man," Clara said. "He's a danger." Gideon nodded once. "He won't get near you again." "Promise?" He turned to her. "With my life." But Elias was not a man easily shaken. 2 days later, a letter arrived, official and wax-sealed. Inside, legal documents claiming paternity of Jamie, forged records, witness statements, a lawyer's letter. Elias wanted custody, and he was threatening to go to court for it. Gideon stared at the paper for a long while, then tore it in half. Then again. Then threw it in the fire, but the fight had begun. That night, Clara packed a bag. Gideon found her in the hallway, tying a satchel with trembling fingers. "Where are you going?" "He's going to hurt you," she said. "He's not afraid of anyone. He doesn't care about Jamie, he just wants money or revenge. If we're not here, he'll leave you alone." "No," Gideon said. "Absolutely not. He'll burn the house down to get what he wants. Then we'll rebuild it. You don't get it. He's not like other people. He doesn't care about law or right or wrong. I don't care what he cares about." His voice shook with something fierce and protective. "You're not leaving." She looked up, eyes wild. "You don't get to choose this. I'm not yours." He grabbed her shoulders gently. "But I want to be. I want to be your father, Clara. I want to raise Jamie. I want to protect you both." She was silent for a long moment. And then she whispered, "You're going to lose everything because of us." He knelt before her. "I already did, a long time ago, but now I have something worth losing." The town square felt like a stage. The next day, Gideon, in full black coat and boots, rode into town. Clara beside him, Jamie in his arms. Straight into the courthouse. He met the sheriff, the mayor, the judge. He handed them every paper, every letter Evelyn had ever written. He declared publicly, officially, and unapologetically, "These children are my family. My name is on their hearts. And if anyone tries to take them, they'll have to go through me. That is not a threat. That is a promise." That night, Elias came back. Not through the front door. Through the back gate, with a knife and a bottle. And a rope. The dogs barked first. Clara ran to Jamie. The housekeeper bolted the windows. Gideon stood on the porch with his shotgun. "You picked the wrong night," he said coldly. Elias grinned. "Or the right one." What followed wasn't a shootout, it was a fight. Between past and future, Gideon was older, slower, but rage made him strong. They struggled in the mud. Fists, blood, boots stomping in the rain-soaked soil. At one point, Elias nearly reached the stairs until Clara stood in the doorway with a lantern raised above her head. "Touch him," she screamed, "and I'll burn you myself." Gideon tackled him to the ground, and when the sheriff arrived, Elias was bloodied, bruised, and finally in cuffs. "You got nothing left," he snarled at Clara. She stared down at him. "I got more now than you'll ever understand." The aftermath was quiet. Court would take weeks, but Elias was locked up. His case was weak, forged, transparent. Clara slept in Gideon's room for 3 nights after. Jamie too. Just to feel safe again. And Gideon? He sat by the bed every night like a guardian, reading old poems, sharpening old knives, holding on to new hope. When spring truly broke, the garden bloomed. Yellow tulips, blue irises. The Wyatt garden burst with life. Clara planted a new tree beside the swing. "Why this tree?" Gideon asked. She looked up. "Because trees don't run. They stay and protect." He nodded. So did he. The trial had not yet come, but the threat was over. Elias Boone had been dragged from the porch, cursing in the rain, and he was now a name spoken only in past tense. But for Clara and Jamie, and even Gideon himself, the real work had only just begun. Because once the danger was gone, what remained wasn't just peace. It was silence. And in that silence came questions, regret, longing, and the slow, stumbling steps of a man trying to become something he'd never dared to be. A father. It started small. He replaced the crib. Jamie's old basket had begun to sag from use, edges gnawed by teething. So Gideon, with calloused hands and shaky confidence, built one himself in the barn using walnut wood, some old nails, and half-remembered memories from when he was a carpenter's apprentice at 16. He sanded it smooth, painted the rails, carved a small rose into one corner. When he brought it inside, Clara was stunned. "You made this?" "I tried." She ran her fingers over the carving. "It's perfect." He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "Was aiming for a horse." She laughed, a real, rolling laugh that filled the kitchen. Jamie squealed in response. For the first time, Gideon smiled without hesitation. Then came the next challenge. Parenting. Jamie was now walking and crooked. "Zigzags and wild tumbles," Clara warned him, but Gideon insisted on babysitting for an hour while she visited the seamstress. It went terribly. He set Jamie down in the drawing room, blinked once, and the boy had vanished. "Jamie?" he called, alarm rising. Thump, crash. He turned the corner and found the boy joyfully flinging chess pieces off a priceless marble table. No, don't eat the bishop." Jamie laughed. Clara returned to a chaotic scene book stacked like towers, jam smeared on the curtains, Gideon chasing a pantless baby around the library. "You left me a monster," Gideon shouted. "You let the monster near jam," Clara retorted, and they laughed. Hard, because that's what families do. Gideon began writing again, not ledgers or legal letters, but stories. He turned Jamie's baby adventures into illustrated tailies, The Midnight Jam Heist, Sir Jamie and the Flying Diaper. Clara added her own pages with sketches of dragons and castles. Jamie, of course, added fingerprints and jelly and crayon explosions. Together, they built a book of belonging. They called it The Houseware. The storm stopped. It sat on the mantel. And every night, Gideon read one story aloud by firelight, publicly. Gideon made a declaration. At the town's Founders' Day festival. He stood on the wooden stage, straight-backed, freshly shaven, and dressed in a coat Clara had chosen. He cleared his throat. All eyes turned. "I've made mistakes," he began, "more than I care to name. But this land, this home, means nothing without someone to share it with." He motioned. Clara walked on stage with Jamie in her arms. Her braid was neat, her boots freshly polished. "I'd like you to meet my daughter and my son." Gasps. Then applause. The mayor stepped forward, shaking Gideon's hand. You'll be raising 'em proper then?" he asked. "As proper as they'll let me," Gideon replied. Clara smirked. Jamie sneezed on the mare. But fatherhood wasn't just applause. There were nightmares. One night, Clara screamed in her sleep, curled up in a ball, sobbing that Elias had returned, that Jamie had been taken, that the fire had reached their room. Gideon burst in, gathered her trembling body, held her tight. "I'm here," he whispered, over and over. "I've got you." "I couldn't move," she cried. "I couldn't save him." "You already did," he said. "You saved him the night you knocked on my door." She buried her face in his shoulder and wept like a child. Because even brave girls have fears. Even strong hearts break. That night, he stayed beside her until morning, slowly. Gideon changed. He began gardening with Clara. He joined her in baking, burning more pies than he'd ever admit. He started humming in the mornings, sometimes even whistling. He took Jamie on long wagon rides, pointing out birds, trees, sky. He built a treehouse. Fell out of it twice. Laughed harder than he had in 20 years. And every time Clara called him Papa, his heart expanded in ways he couldn't describe. He wasn't just the Baron anymore. He was a father. Then came her birthday. Clara never mentioned it. Never asked for gifts or cake. But Gideon had plans. He brought in a dressmaker from 2 towns over. He baked a cake himself. Burned the first 2. He made her favorite cinnamon apples with honey glaze. He found Evelyn's old music box and repaired it with trembling hands. The manor sparkled with lanterns and paper ribbons. When Clara walked in, she stopped, eyes wide, mouth parted. "You did this?" "For you," Gideon said. "I've never had a party before." "Well, now you have a father who won't miss one." She ran to him, arms around his middle, and for once, she didn't just hug him, she held on. That night, under starlight, she whispered, "You don't have to keep proving." Proving what? That you're staying?" He looked at her. "I'm not proving it. I'm living it." Weeks later, a letter arrived. From the courthouse. Final verdict. Elias Boone's claims were void. Jamie's guardianship was officially granted to Gideon Blackamore. He dropped the letter onto the table, exhaled, then, without a word, lifted Jamie and twirled him through the room. Clara laughed. The house laughed with them. Later that evening, Clara handed him a note in her own crooked handwriting. "I used to wish for Mama to come back. Now I wish she could see us." I think she'd smile. I think she'd say, "You did okay, Gideon." Gideon folded the note and kept it in his breast pocket. Always? The garden bloomed wild that summer. Tomatoes, wild herbs, peonies. But one corner remained untouched. A small white stone stood there, freshly carved. Evelyn Wyatt. Brave, beautiful, beloved. Her roots remain. Clara watered it every morning. Jamie learned to place flowers. And Gideon? He stood there quietly, one hand on Clara's shoulder, the other holding Jamie's. He was no longer lonely, no longer lost. He was no longer just the Baron in the manor on the hill. He was Father. And for the first time in his life, he belonged to someone. The summer breeze stirred the lace curtains as Clara cleaned the study. Jamie was napping, sprawled like a tiny starfish across the feather bed. Gideon had ridden into town to purchase a new saddle for Jamie's growing pony. Clara was humming softly. Dust danced in the shafts of golden light. Behind a row of old books, worn ledgers, property titles, and journals long untouched, she found a small, leather-bound box. Its clasp was rusted but still intact. Curious. She lifted it gently onto the table, brushing off years of neglect. Inside, a faded ribbon, a pressed flower, and an envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, in familiar handwriting, "To be opened only when she is safe." Evelyn Wyatt Clara's hands shook. Her mother's voice returned in a whisper. If anything ever happens to me, baby, go find the Baron. He'll know what to do. She ran for Gideon. The reading Gideon didn't speak for a long time. He held the envelope in both hands, staring at Evelyn's looping script. It felt like she was in the room again, like she'd walk in, call him foolish, and start ordering him around. Clara sat across from him, silent. Jamie curled on her lap. At last, Gideon broke the wax. Inside was a letter, yellowed but neatly folded. The scent of lavender lingered faintly on the parchment. He began to read aloud. Gideon, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm gone. Maybe I died in peace. Maybe I didn't. But I trust you to be reading this because my daughter has found her. Way to you. I hope she's safe. I hope she still loves apples. I hope she still sleeps with her hand on her cheek. But more than anything, I hope she's found her way into your heart. She's everything I ever did right. Take care of her like you would your own. Because once, a long time ago, you promised me you'd take care of what I loved most. And I never forgot that. Evelyn, memories flood in. Gideon folded the letter slowly. Clara sat in stunned silence. I don't understand. You knew her? Gideon stood, walked to the window. The fields rolled beyond, sunlit and free. I knew your mother before you were born, he said quietly. Before either of us were married. I was 20, foolish, stubborn. She was the only person in this world who ever told me no to my face and made me feel proud of it. Clara blinked. Were you in love with her? A long pause. Then, with a tired smile, Gideon said, no, she was my friend. The kind of friend who saves you even when you don't want saving. A promise revealed. He explained it all. How Evelyn had written to him while she was still pregnant, fearing Elias. How she knew he would turn cruel. How she asked Gideon, if anything ever happened, to care for the child she hadn't yet met. I thought she'd been spared, Gideon whispered. I thought she escaped. But when you showed up at my door that night, his voice broke. You kept your promise, Clara said softly. I did not right away. But you did now. You saved us. He looked at her. Tears welled in his eyes. No, Clara, you saved me. A second letter, but that wasn't the only page in the envelope. Clara reached back into the box. Another folded note. This one addressed to Clara. Her hands trembled. She opened it. Gideon sat beside her as she read. My Clara, I hope your hair is still wild and your heart is still louder than the world. If you're reading this, I must have broken your heart. And I'm so sorry, baby, but you were never alone. I left you with stories and strength. And I left you a guide, someone stubborn enough to build you a life better than I ever could. Trust Gideon, and trust yourself. The world may break you, but you are not made to stay broken. Run in the rain, eat sweet things, say what you mean, and never think you were abandoned. I loved you to the last breath. Mama. The ink ran where tears hit the page. Clara breaks, then heals. She wept for hours that night. Not from sadness, but from release. All the years of loneliness. Wondering why. Wondering if she'd been left behind. But now she knew her mother didn't vanish without care. She had left behind breadcrumbs of love, soft and buried deep, so that one day Clara would feel held again. Gideon held her tightly, saying nothing. Some griefs cannot be mended. They can only be witnessed. A new chapter begins the next day. Clara placed both letters in a frame. They hung in the hallway next to Jamie's muddy footprints, scribbles, and the carved family tree they had begun on the wall. Jamie toddled by, giggling, holding an apple too big for his hand. He pointed at the letters. Mama? Clara smiled. Yes, baby, that was your first mama. And this? She looked at Gideon. This is the one who'll always be here. Gideon lifted Jamie into his arms. I may not have started this story, he said, "but I'm here for every chapter." After. Closing scene. A garden and a promise. The stone in the garden now had company. Beside Evelyn's marker was a new one. To Mama, your roots grew into us. And beside it, a wooden bench hand-carved by Gideon and Clara together. They sat. On it every evening now, watching Jamie chase fireflies, laughing through the dusk. "I used to think this place was haunted," Clara whispered. "It was," Gideon said. "By what?" "By what could have been." She reached for his hand. Not anymore. They were no longer ghosts in a hollow house. They were a family growing where love had once only been planted in memory. It had been 3 months since Clara and Jamie arrived at the Baron's estate. 3 months of peace, safety, growth, and healing. Jamie now ran through the orchard barefoot, chasing dragonflies. Clara spent her mornings tending the garden and evenings baking pies with Gideon's quiet help. Gideon, once a hermit cloaked in silence, had become the kind of man who smiled before he spoke and laughed more than he frowned. But peace, as always, has an expiration date. One summer morning, as Clara brought in laundry smelling of sun and soap, a rider galloped up the gravel path. A storm in his wake. Dust and danger. Trouble had finally found them. "The sheriff returns." The rider dismounted swiftly. It was Sheriff Dane Mercer. He was a firm man with fair hands, the type to quote the law before he'd help a child. But he wasn't cruel. He nodded at Gideon with a grim look. "I'm sorry, Baron, but I've got orders." Gideon's jaw tensed. "What kind?" Mercer held out a folded parchment official bearing a court seal. Clara stepped onto the porch. Shielding Jamie behind her. Mercer removed his hat. "It's about the girl and the boy. A claim's been made on custody by Elias Carr." Clara gasped. The custody claim. Elias Carr, the man who abandoned them, who drove Evelyn into hiding, who never lifted a hand to raise his child, had filed a claim to reclaim Jamie. He called Clara an unwed, unfit sister with no stable income and accused Gideon of harboring fugitives. The papers summoned them to appear in court in 8 days. Failure to comply would result in lawmen forcibly taking Jamie to Elias's custody. Clara crumpled to the porch. The color drained from her face. Gideon's voice was low and lethal. "He's doing this to spite her. Evelyn, even in death." Mercer only nodded. "The law doesn't know that, Baron. All it knows is ink and witness." Preparing for war that night, the ranch sat still under the weight of worry. Jamie, too young to understand, slept peacefully. Clara sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Gideon laid out their options. "We can fight this. We have Evelyn's letters, your testimony, and the word of people in town who remember what Elias did." "But he has wealth," Clara murmured, "and connections. He can buy a verdict." Gideon leaned closer. "So we give them something money can't buy." She looked up. "Truth?" she asked. He shook his head. "A family. One the court can see with their own eyes." Gathering testimony over the next few days, Gideon rode to every neighbor within 50 miles. He returned with written statements from townsfolk who remembered Evelyn's bruises, her fleeing in fear, her seeking sanctuary. Clara visited Mrs. Devonshire, the retired midwife who helped deliver Jamie. Mrs. Devonshire signed a letter confirming Clara had raised Jamie with tenderness and dignity. Even as a teenager, the blacksmith's wife offered a statement about Elias's rage when drunk. Even the preacher offered to speak of Evelyn's quiet strength and her faith in Gideon. They were building a case brick by brick. But would it be enough? Clara's weakness. One evening, Clara confessed something to Gideon. "I was scared to open that letter Mama left me, because if she told me I wasn't enough, I wouldn't have survived it." "You're more than enough," Gideon said firmly. "You've built a life for Jamie out of ash. You're braver than any man I've known." She bit her lip. "But what if the court doesn't see it?" "Then," Gideon said, We make them see you. Training for court for days, Gideon. Helped Clara prepare. How to speak clearly under pressure. How to counter questions about her unmarried status. How to show she provided Jamie a home full of safety and love. He even brushed the dust off his old suit. Clara laughed when he tried it on, and the sleeves barely reached his wrists. They practiced until midnight. They read legal statements. They cried. They yelled. They hugged longer than ever before. It was the most alive either of them had felt in years. Jamie's role Jamie was kept away from the tension. But one night, he found Clara crying in the barn. "Mama?" he said softly, crawling into her lap. She wiped her tears. "I'm okay, honey." He laid his head on her shoulder. "I like it here," he mumbled. "Don't want to go with that man." Her heart broke. "I know, baby. We're going to do everything to stay here." Jamie looked up at her and asked, "Do we have to be scared?" She thought about that. Then answered, "No, not scared, just ready." The night before the hearing, Clara stood on the porch, the stars stretching wide. Gideon joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "I keep thinking I'm going to lose him," she whispered. He touched her shoulder. "He's already yours. But sometimes you have to fight to remind the world." She turned to him. "Promise me something? Anything. If we win this, you won't keep being lonely." He smiled softly. "You already broke that curse the moment you knocked on my door." To the court they go. At sunrise, the carriage rolled into the valley. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Jamie was in his best clothes. Gideon wore the same stiff, too small jacket and a tie Clara had tied for him herself. They entered the courthouse. Wooden floors, high ceilings, and the scent of pine. On the other end sat Elias Carr, slick, smiling, suited. His eyes flicked over Clara and Jamie like they were cattle. Clara squeezed Jamie's hand. "I am not afraid," she whispered. To be continued. The judge entered. The courtroom settled. The trial was about to begin, but no matter what verdict came, Clara had something Elias could never steal: a child who knew he was loved, a man beside her who would never leave, a family not bound by blood but by choice. The courtroom smelled of oiled wood, old leather, and nerves. Clara sat straight, Jamie by her side, Gideon seated just behind her, his shoulders wide and calm like a wall built to withstand anything. Across the aisle, Elias Carr leaned back in, his chair with a smug curl on his lips, his attorney flipping through pages of carefully constructed lies. Judge Harlan, a wrinkled man with silver spectacles and the weight of years on his shoulders, tapped his gavel. "Let us begin," he said. And the battle for Jamie's future started. Scene 2, Elias' story. Elias went. First. His lawyer painted him as a changed man, a father who'd made mistakes but now wanted to make things right. He had land, livestock, investments. He could offer Jamie a proper life. He was robbed of his chance to raise his son, the attorney said. With a tearful tone practiced in a dozen prior cases, Elias gave a deep, phony sigh. "I was grieving, Your Honor. I didn't know how to cope when Evelyn left. I wasn't perfect, but I never stopped loving my boy." Clara's knuckles turned white. Gideon didn't blink. Scene 3, Clara speaks the truth. Then it was Clara's turn. She rose, her voice small at first, but then her heart took over. "Jamie's not a piece of property. He's a boy, a good one, brave and kind and bright. I didn't raise him out of duty, I raised him out of love." She spoke of Evelyn, how she fled Elias's violence. How Clara, at just 17, gave up everything to raise Jamie in her sister's stead. "I didn't have wealth," she said, "but I had honesty and love, and I've never lied to him about who I am or who his father was." Tears shimmered in the judge's eyes. Scene 4, the letters and the witnesses. Then came the letters. Gideon read aloud the one Evelyn wrote to Clara before she died. Clara, if anything happens to me, don't let Jamie grow up in fear. You know what I ran from. Keep him safe. Give him the life I couldn't. The courtroom was silent except for sniffling. Then, one by one, the witnesses stood. Mrs. Devonshire, the midwife, told how Evelyn begged her not to tell Elias where they were. The blacksmith's wife recalled Elias shouting in town, calling Evelyn wicked names. The preacher gave his blessing for Clara and Gideon's new family. And finally Jamie stood. The room hushed. Scene V. Jamie takes the stand. The judge hesitated. Are you sure you want to speak, son? Jamie nodded. I do. He stood on a stool, too short for the witness chair. I'm not scared of Mr. Carr, Jamie said. But I don't want to live with him. I don't know him. I don't want to know him. He turned to Clara. She's my mama. She sings to me. She tucks me in. She lets me help make soup, even when I make a mess. Then he turned to Gideon, and he makes me feel brave. I like when he calls me champ. The courtroom wept. Scene 6. The verdict hours passed. The judge took the case under review. Everyone waited. Finally, Judge Harlan returned. He sat slowly, glasses perched on his nose. In the eyes of the law, a parent has rights. But so does the child. He looked at Elias. You had your chance. You gave it up. He looked at Clara and Gideon. You created a home out of ashes. And you gave that boy something no court can legislate, peace. He banged the gavel once. Full. Custody is awarded to Miss Clara May Whitfield, with formal guardianship extended to Mr. Gideon Wells. Scene 7. Elias Exitelius stood. Appeal. He barked. The judge didn't even look up. You're free to try, he said calmly. But I'd advise you to consider what's best for the boy, not for your pride. Elias turned to Clara one last time, venom in his eyes. This isn't over. Clara stood and whispered, Yes, it is. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. Scene 8. Celebration at the ranch. They returned to the ranch just as the sky cracked open with rain. A sweet summer kind that didn't bring fear, only cleansing. Jamie danced in it, arms wide. Gideon laughed, stepping into the storm without his hat, letting it soak him. Clara stood on the porch, barefoot, her heart soaring. The rain washed away the fear, the courtrooms, the years of running. They were free now, free to be what they always were, a family. Scene 9. One more promise. A week later. Under a cottonwood tree, Jamie held a box with a ring inside. Uncle Gid, he said, grinning, I think it's your turn. Gideon knelt in the grass, not to Clara, but beside her. He didn't need a speech, just this. I love you. I love him. I'd be honored to be your husband and his father. Clara wiped her tears. I thought I'd never have a home. But then I knocked on yours. She slipped the ring on. Scene X. Epilogue. The new name on the gate 1 year later. The gate to the ranch bore a new name, Wells Whitfield Ranch. A home rebuilt from the brokenness of 3 lives. Clara taught at the local school. Jamie raised lambs and chased frogs. Gideon built a barn with his own hands. They weren't perfect. They had loud mornings and sleepy dinners and nights filled with fireflies. But every night before bed, Jamie whispered, Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Dad. And every night, Gideon tucked him in with the same words, You're home, champ.